Well, hi folks, it's great to be with you once again as we consider our final installment in Matthew chapter 18. As some of you will know, we've been looking at this for the last few weeks. It's a block of teaching in Matthew's Gospel, of which there are 5. This is the third one, where it explains and applies what it means for us to live as followers of Jesus in community with one another. And as a church this year, we've put an emphasis on discipleship and fellowship. Fellowship is somewhat hindered by the current restrictions, but this is a way of just thinking what it means for us to live together as Christians. So I hope this has been a helpful few weeks of study, and I hope this is a helpful conclusion to this series today. Why not join us as we look at Matthew 18, verses 21 to 35. And I hope you can see the slides. I had a bit of feedback that people couldn't see what was on the screen very well when there was more of me and less of the slides. So I've swapped it round, and I hope this is more helpful. Reading them from Matthew chapter 18, verses 21 to 35. Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, "Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times?" Jesus answered, "I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. At this, the servant fell on his knees before him. 'Be patient with me,' he begged, 'and I'll pay back everything.' The servant's master took pity on him, cancelled the debt, and let him go. But when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins. He grabbed him and began to choke him. 'Pay back what you owe me,' he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, 'Be patient with me and I'll pay it back.' But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were outraged and went and told their master everything that had happened. Then the master called the servant in. 'You wicked servant,' he said, 'I cancelled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servants just as I had on you?' In anger, this master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he could pay back all that he owed. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart." Let's pray together, shall we? Father, we thank you for your word, and we invite your Holy Spirit to come upon it and to come upon us whenever we're listening to this today. Move our hearts with all that you have done for us, that we might be channels of your grace and mercy to those with whom we interact. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. So then, let's get to the text. Peter is asking how many times he should forgive, and he suggests 7. And he doesn't just pluck that number out of the air. The rabbinic tradition taught that 3 times of forgiveness was enough. And that came from the prophet Amos, who in his kind of famous oracles would say, 3 times I will relent, but not 4. So the thought was that 3 was appropriate amount of forgiveness. And so when Peter says, shall I forgive 7 times, he's doubling that and adding 1 more for good measure. So he's being really, really generous. But Jesus replies, not 7, but 77. And there's some debate about whether Jesus meant 7 times 7 or 70 times 7. Doesn't really matter. The point is this, that in scripture, the number 7 is a symbolic number like 12 and 40 and other numbers that occur a lot. And 7 represents for the Jewish people completeness and wholeness. So the point that Jesus is making is that forgiveness should be an infinite number. It shouldn't be something that is limited. In fact, Tom Wright says, if you're still counting how many times you've forgiven somebody, you're not really forgiving them at all. It's about having a generosity of heart that means that forgiveness is ongoing and is endless. Now, sometimes we could apply this as forgiving an infinite number of things. Think about any of us that have had relationships that last over decades. They might be friendship, they might be siblings, they might be, spouses. And, whenever you're in a long-standing relationship, whatever their nature, you need to exercise a multitude of forgiveness for things little and big. And so it may well be that, it's talking about forgiveness in multiple places, multiple things, multiple times, and therefore we will all need our forgiving disposition in order to move through life. But equally, there may well be the need to keep choosing forgiveness as a process of healing and wholeness, and to wake up each day or maybe each hour or even more frequently than that, and continue to choose to forgive somebody that has done us repeated harm. In fact, that process of forgiving may take a lifetime of choosing to let it go, not to let go what happened or to let anybody off the hook, but a choice to not let our ill feeling towards the person that harmed us eat us up inside. Forgiveness is always actually benefits us more than it benefits the person to whom we are seeking to extend it to. And as we've said a few times in recent talks, I said it in my Bible study last week, and we had it in a sermon recently that Johnny Libby gave, which was really helpful. Forgiveness and full reconciliation are linked, but they don't necessarily go hand in hand. They're not the same thing. So, as we've heard before, forgiveness is about releasing ourselves of the pain. In modern parlance, people will say, "I'm living rent free in your head." Forgiveness is about releasing the hold that somebody else has over us within our own arena, our own orbit. Reconciliation, restoration are about trying to mend relationship and bring a restoration of fellowship. And sometimes both can happen. That's wonderful. And I've seen that happen over massive things. But sometimes it just isn't appropriate for the safety and well-being of the person doing the forgiving to go back to a situation, particularly where there's abuse or emotional manipulation. It's important to release the person from within our heart, but I don't think we need to go back into a dangerous situation. Let's not get sidetracked on that. How, I wonder, do you find forgiveness? And what does it look like for you to forgive? Maybe just pause for a moment or so and take a couple of minutes to reflect on this. You may want to write something down. You may just want to think. And as always, if I don't give you enough time, just press pause on the video and restart again in a moment. But Jesus then goes on to give a practical illustration, a picture of what it means for forgiveness to be worked out. He tells a story then of a servant who owes the king 10,000 bags of gold. Now, that's the equivalent of multiple billions of pounds in our economy today. So it's a ridiculous amount of debt. Jesus is deliberately using hyperbole and exaggeration to caricature and to emphasize, to drive home his point. And it's evident that the servant can't pay. And so the likely consequence of a lack of payment was that you ended up in the debtor's jail. You ended up in the debtor's jail, or more likely in slavery. And then, of course, because of the size of the debt, that wouldn't just be the individual person being enslaved, but it'd be their family, their household, and likely for generations to come, they would be sold into slavery and remain in slavery as a way of making up this huge amount of debt. And so in absolute desperation, the servant makes a ridiculous pledge. You know, "Oh, give me some time, I'll pay it all back, I promise." Yeah, he's never, ever going to be able to do this. And the king, seeing the desperate plight of the servant, chooses to have mercy. He took pity on him, says Matthew, or in different translations, had mercy on him. Michael Wilkins says, mercy is not giving to a person what they deserve. Really simple definition there. Mercy is not giving to a person what they deserve. And so the king doesn't treat this servant as they deserve. He doesn't enslave him or throw him into the debtor's jail. He treats him initially with great mercy. But the servant that has received mercy, sadly, doesn't, in Jesus' story, pass this on, because he finds somebody that owes him some money, and it's probably in the region of about 50 to 100 pounds, maybe a little bit more, but not too much. And so when you look at these two debts, the servant that has been forgiven billions is now being miserly and demanding full payment of someone that can't pay back 50 quid. All right. So it is, again, a ridiculous story which Jesus is deliberately telling to point out the awful reaction of the servant that has been forgiven. It's and again, near identical words are used by the second servant in begging for his debt to be relieved. He says, "Be patient with me, I will pay it back." And so clearly, this isn't a kind of a formula. If you say these certain words, then we're to understand that forgiveness is automatic. And there are times when certainly the evangelical wing of the church can get into that kind of mindset. If only you pray this set of words, this set prayer, all the magic happens. So formulaic petitions of prayers aren't important here. What matters is the heart of the creditor. It is the generosity of spirit in the first king, in the king, lacking in the first servant, that is the thing of note and the thing that makes the difference. So what does this mean then for you and I? What are the consequences for Jesus' hearers of Matthew's gospel, and what are the consequences and applications for you and for me? Well, if mercy is not giving to somebody what they deserve, then grace, says Michael Wilkins, is giving to somebody what they don't deserve. All right, it's the kind of slight change there. And the servant doesn't act in a spirit of grace. Philip Yancey would say he reacts with ungrace. It's the complete opposite of loving kindness. It's miserly selfishness, and an awful kind of critical, selfish spirit. But for you and me, somebody who has experienced the grace and mercy of the kingdom of God are to be transformed and changed people. And the evidence of that transformation is lived out in our character and in our conduct. Or again, Michael Wilkins, who's a commentator on Matthew, that's why he's cropping up a lot this morning. He says, mercy experienced will produce mercy that is demonstrated. So therefore, if we have tasted and seen the goodness of God and known ourselves to be forgiven of our sins, truly, it really does take quite something incredible not to pass that on to other people. See, we receive incredible mercy and grace from God. Look at verse 32. The master who's calling his servant to account, who's been forgiven much but not passed it on. He said, I cancelled all that debt of yours. And there's a deliberate emphasis there, which we can easily skip over, verse 32. It's the huge amount that the king has forgiven him. And then you still acted in an ungracious way to others. And, all that debt, we could read that that with emphasis when we think of our own debt before the Lord as well. You see, we receive incredible mercy and grace from God. If you take this parable as an allegory of our standing before God, we have an unpayable debt. We have racked up an account which we could never make up. Expressed in our, or caused by our sinfulness and our shameful deeds. It is impossible to ever think that we could ever make that up by things that we could do. It is impossible. But God, in his mercy and in his grace, has withheld all that we deserve, and he has given us what we don't deserve. He's withheld what we do deserve, which is hell, really, the eternal punishment, and he has given us what we do not deserve, forgiveness and grace. Tom Wright says in that context that every time we forgive somebody else, we are passing on a drop of water out of the bucketful that God has already given you. A lovely idea. So those of us that are watching this, who love the Lord Jesus, who have experienced God's mercy and grace in our own lives, those of us that have tasted and seen the goodness of God, are charged to ensure we are reflecting God's bountiful and abundant grace in our dealings with other people. And the New Testament this is Jesus speaking, ends this passage with a harsh warning. This is how my heavenly Father will treat you unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart. Tom Wright, again, a brilliant New Testament scholar, says it's like air in the lungs. You need to breathe it out before being able to freshly inhale. You need to breathe it out before you can freshly inhale. And so this parable teaches the responsibility of the forgiven people. And you and I are forgiven much by God's wonderful grace. And if we have experienced that salvation, it will be evident by producing a merciful disposition in us. Jesus commands, not invites or give the option for, but he commands a heart deep change in standing between us and the offender. We're to forgive from our heart. Because Jesus knows that it is like a huge sack that we carry around with us, full of kind of bitterness and pain and sorrow when we have been offended. And often the person that has done the offense, sometimes, of course, they are very aware of what they have done. But of course, a lot of the time it can easily be something that has caused offense where the person in question has not realized or has been careless or forgotten about it. And so often it's the case that it's only us that is carrying around that great burden. Jesus wants us to understand that we can relieve ourselves of that burden by choosing forgiveness and choosing grace. In another gospel, Jesus will say, "For freely you have received, now freely give." I wonder, just as we close, whether the amount that God has forgiven us affects our perspective on forgiveness at all. Maybe let's just dwell there for a moment. And consider that before we rush on. And let's pray then for each of us as we close our time together. Father, we thank you for the great debt which you have relieved us of. We thank you that in Jesus' death on the cross, in his blood shed, you have cancelled our great debt to you. You have not given us what we do deserve and given us what we don't deserve. And we are so very grateful. We thank you for Jesus and for his death and resurrection for us. We thank you for our salvation today. And we pray that you would so fill us with a fresh awareness and a joy at our salvation that we might pass that on to others, that more and more your church might be brought together, reconciled and built up, that we might be a healthy church that transforms the world. We ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Thanks for listening, folks. That's the end of our series on Matthew's Gospel, and we'll be picking up somewhere else next week for a couple of weeks before our Easter break. So I hope this has been helpful, and we'll see you before too long. God bless.